To the Cajun dance and the Zydeco, filet gumbo and a crawfish pie. Filet gumbo and a crawfish pie.
Welcome to Literary Gumbo, a continuing look at the world of writers, writing, books, pamphlets, and in some cases not even finished books. And today we're going to talk, my name is Fred Klein, I'm sort of the chief stirrer, but my guest today is somebody who is in the midst of a very important project about to be published, or hopefully to be published. Welcome to you, Claudia Chotzen. It's the first time we've met, but your husband is well known here and throughout the whole world probably. But you're familiar with this whole operation. I mean, you're used to being in front of the camera.
Actually, I have not been in front of the camera.
He has never let you be in front of the camera?
Not in many years. I used to be behind the camera because I made documentary films in Hawaii, but that was about 26 years ago.
Well, let's go all the way back. Because you've had an interesting career before you got involved in writing. Where are you from?
I'm from Seattle, Washington originally, and the story that we're going to talk about takes place in Seattle. Grew up there, and then the work that I did was...
She was one of 8 children.
One of 8 children to parents who... Should I go ahead?
No, I think we should talk about, because that's what the book is. No, just tell me about sort of your background.
My background is, so then I met Hap when I was 21 years old, so it's been almost 40 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's a lot it's been a lot to be congratulated for. And then we have been together since, and I became a lawyer, and then we moved to Hawaii. He moved with me.
This is still in Seattle?
This was, we met in the Northwest.
Okay.
And then we moved, after I went to law school, we moved to Hawaii so that I could work for a justice on the Hawaii Supreme Court.
Oh.
And that was very interesting work. And then after that...
Wait, let's just talk about that.
Sure.
So is that purely legal, or is it...
That was purely legal. That was writing opinions for the Supreme Court of Hawaii. And for laws that are today in place about making the beaches public and different issues in Hawaii.
So you created, once the laws passed, did you create sort of the details of the laws?
Yeah, you work on the precedent of other cases, and then talking to my Justice Lum, the name of the man, the Supreme Court Justice. And then we decide which way to vote on the opinion, and then I would write the opinion as a draft, and then he would discuss it, and they would have to vote on it in the Hawaii Supreme Court.
So were you raising a family? Were you and Hap raising a family?
No, we had not had children yet, and while I was being a lawyer, Hap got involved in television in Hawaii, also in public television, and I was very interested in what he was doing and asked if I could volunteer for working on some of the programs at the same time I was a lawyer. And I found that it was much more interesting. Showbiz, right, to make documentaries.
So what kind of documentaries?
So we made documentaries
Hawaii?
Produced and directed about local Hawaii issues. So one of them was called the Honolulu Wheelchair Marathon, and it became an award-winning documentary about.
But had you created the marathon?
Not the marathon. Covered? The marathon was there, but then I covered it.
Okay.
And chose different participants to focus on and interview with their stories.
And where were these documentaries shown? Local.
Well, they were shown locally. Then they were shown. Some of them were shown nationally. The Honolulu Wheelchair Marathon was shown in Canada on Canadian public television because we had quite a few Canadian participants that were highlighted. Another one I did was on a Hawaiian family that was called Gift to My Children, and it was a Hawaiian woman, her name is Joyce Kainoa, who had 6 children, and she lived in Honolulu, and she felt that her children were losing all their connection with with the original Hawaiian culture. So she moved them to the far side of Molokai, where you could only reach it by helicopter in the winter, by boat in the summer. And she was raising her children completely isolated from the rest of the world, but teaching them.
So it was homeschooling.
Homeschooling, hunting.
In the extreme.
Exactly, hunting and fishing. And there was an article on her in National Geographic magazine, and several different TV stations approached her, 2020, 60 Minutes, and they said, we want to make a documentary on you. And Joyce said, absolutely not. And then I met a woman at a party one day who had lived with the family. And I heard about it, and I said, do you think she'd be willing to meet me and let me come visit her?
Right. Oh,
so
wow.
I went and lived with them for a week.
Oh.
And at the end of the week, she said, you can come in and make this program.
That's great.
And Hap actually went in and did the sound, and we had a cameraman, and the NBC affiliate in Honolulu funded it.
Okay.
And that program was shown all over the world, actually the country and the world. It was shown in Micronesia and New Zealand to the Maori people.
And what happened to the family? Do we know?
So we don't, several people have said, Fred, that why don't you go back and do a follow-up, because now all these kids are grown up and what have their lives become? What's happened to them? And I'm still in contact with Joyce.
And you have your original.
I have all the original footage, yeah. And
that's a good story.
It would be a great story to see, years later, 25 years later, what happened to the 6 kids. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that was a really fun one to work on because it really touched the local community. They were very, very appreciative.
So there you are, and how do you get here from there?
And then we, let's see, we had our first child, and I would say that was the turning point.
Okay.
Our son, Zachary. I was ready to go straight back to making television programs. I was about to sign a contract, and Hap said, you've never had a child before, don't sign the contract. You might want to be with our new son.
You might try being mothering.
And I was absolutely not. I am career woman all the way. I will be back in 6 weeks. Don't even talk to me about it. We're going to get a nanny.
Oh, I'm thinking of that. Go on.
Yeah. So it was get back to work, and of course I'm going to sign the contract. I loved making documentary films. Just loved it. It was such a collaboration with a team and working with people. But Hap convinced me, just wait a few weeks. And then I gave...
A few weeks, it turned into what?
It turned into 25 years.
Oh.
Yeah. The last 10 years of that 25 years, I've been writing this book. And then we decided to move from Hawaii.
To here?
And we moved to Ashland, Oregon.
Okay, great.
And the reason, Shakespeare.
Big town.
Right. And the reason we moved was this awakening that I had about what had happened to me as a child.
Your personal story.
My personal story, which did not really come to the forefront until I had a child to protect.
Your own child. That's interesting.
Yeah. I really was in denial. I was really, the book is called Picture Perfect. Yeah. We had on the outside the perfect family, and we still were in that myth in a sense. And once I had my own son, who I then decided not to go back to work because I wanted to not miss a moment with him.
And also not have him turn into
that kind
of situation.
Yeah. Exactly. And then we realized we needed to leave the islands because my parents lived in Hawaii.
Okay.
And my mother, this is a story about my parents.
But let's go back.
Yeah.
So that you go to Ashland.
So we went to Ashland, yes. And which turned out to be, I think, more about our son Zach's life because he started from the age of 4 and 5 going to Shakespeare plays, memorizing Shakespeare, and just being inspired.
Is he an actor?
He went into theater, and he now works for the Theater Communications Guild in New York. He's there in publishing, theater publishing.
Oh, great.
But now he's thinking of going to law school because he thinks he can't make a living in theater. So, but anyway, theater was his life for many years.
So now from Ashland, did you come here?
And then what happened was we were in Ashland and we moved back up to the Pacific Northwest for Hap to take a job, and that was like a nightmare for me because that's where everything that happened in my childhood
came back to you?
Came back to me. And I was like, couldn't even believe, he told me on April Fool's Day, and I said, is this an April Fool's joke? I cannot go back there. And I went back there, and that's when I really got very, very depressed, and that's when the real work started of this is what's a catharsis. This is what really happened to me. Yeah, and that's what really the beginning process. And I was depressed with the weather, which is the gray northwest weather of Seattle. Yeah. But I could never tell Fred whether it was the weather or the memories mixed in, the gray memories mixed in. And so I was in severe depression, and we knew we needed to go to Sunshine, and we picked Santa Barbara.
Oh.
So that's how we got here.
Oh, it's a great
12 years ago.
Great for every one of us.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for coming here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very, very happy.
But
to be
now,
here.
so now comes, you're not doing documentaries,
No.
you're not lawyering.
No, I'm not lawyering.
Now is that when you decided that it was time to tell the story?
Exactly.
To face
and
it?
I really wanted to face it, but I did not, since I have 7 brothers and sisters, and they're all...
Yeah, let's hold it right
Okay,
second. So
okay.
the book that she's has written and is working on is called Picture Perfect. And this is the result of your finally looking back at your own childhood and your family life. Now sort of set up the
exactly.
situation.
So we were a very well-known family in the central area of Seattle, which is the inner city of Seattle. My parents had both escaped the Holocaust in Germany. They met in this country, but they had both grown up in Germany.
Survivors.
Yeah, both survivors, but neither one of them were in the concentration camps. But they both had rough, horrible things happen to them. And they met in this country, and they moved to Seattle together to start their lives as a couple. And the reason they picked Seattle was it reminded my father of this small town he grew up in Germany called Siegenholz, and it was in the mountains, and they had grown up skiing, and so they moved to Seattle, and they had a very idealistic view of changing the world and not having prejudice in their lives for their children the way that they had.
Now we have 8 children.
We have 8 children. And
Where are you?
Right in the middle.
In the middle.
Yeah, I'm right in the middle.
And boys, how many?
5 girls and 3 boys.
5 girls.
And my mother started with twins, so she started with a boy and girl twin in 1949.
Okay.
And there was a big article on her on the front page of the Seattle Times when she had the twins. A Holocaust, I guess it was a Holocaust refugee, has twins and needs help at night to help bottle feed the twins. And so they featured her story of coming to Seattle, of her parents making it out of Germany. And that's where it began.
So she's a celebrity now.
So she is a celebrity my whole life long, and this is part of why it's called Picture Perfect.
Okay.
She was she's still living. She
is still living.
Still living.
I didn't realize
she has
that.
Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah.
She lives near my sister in Sacramento. My sister is a physician, and she doesn't know any of us anymore. Has
so
not for about 10 years. But
the memory's gone.
She's memory's gone, and she will be 90 in January.
Okay.
And she is extremely charismatic, was and probably still is extremely charismatic. She was like her own star that the world orbited around. And she got very involved in the Seattle Civil Rights Movement and was a local hero, fighting for justice and civil rights and protesting the Vietnam War at the same time. So we were a very visible family in the Seattle community. We were 8 kids. We were always involved in sports and in academics. Every one of us had to shine.
What about your father? Wait, we're still telling you.
He was a businessman. He started his own wholesale variety company and it became a very large company. Successful. And the main dynamic was that he adored my mother in every way. He felt less secure about his own identity. He was a little bit hunchbacked and had not a lot of self-confidence. And he's no longer living. But he absolutely worshipped the ground that my mother, And at this point, we know that they were both sort of broken people from what their histories had been, from their backgrounds. But my mother, whose name was Carla, she ran the world that we lived in. And we all, one friend called her, she said Carla was a goddess. She was beautiful, she was charismatic, and she was
carrying the torch for the good things.
For the good things, exactly, Fred. She good causes. There's a book that was just published in Seattle called Seattle in black and white, the civil rights movement. She's one of the heroes listed in there. So that's the world.
That's the background.
That's the background, and that's the world on the outside.
Raising 8 children. Now, of course,
yes.
I mean,
and starting her own business. She became a photographer.
Oh.
And so a lot of the photos that are in here.
Oh, that you're going to...
Yeah, these are all my mother's photos. She was a black and white photographer. She started the business when the twins were babies because she wanted to be able to stay home with the babies, but also have a profession.
Something to do.
So her photographs were known all over the Northwest.
Wow.
And
wow.
Yeah.
So she is an indomitable.
She was an indomitable. She was admirable and really
to the outside.
To the outside world, right?
That's why this book. It's what's happened on the inside.
That's exactly right, and that's what's taken me 61 years to be able to tell this story.
To be able to tell this
story.
There's
so many secrets.
But how long have you been working on it?
I've been working on it 10 years, and
really how?
Yeah, and it really what kept me for the first few years from being able to go out with it to anybody. In fact, this is the first time I'm talking.
You're talking to a stranger.
To a stranger. That's right.
Okay. Don't consider me a stranger, but okay.
I consider you a friend. But that's how long it's taken because when there is abuse, it's so shaming, and that it becomes so much, a process of needing to heal that, and for me, a process of needing to find my voice to be able to speak about it. And at first, I didn't want to speak.
And you're doing this all by yourself at the outset.
You mean without
writing the book?
Yes.
Putting it all down on paper.
And it was too painful to do it. I ended up trying to sit in a room by myself, and I wrote many sections of it. But then I thought I needed a ghostwriter because I thought I can't write it. It's too emotionally
too hurtful.
And then the ghostwriter was helpful in that we sat and we tape recorded many of me speaking the stories. And then I had them, and then I realized friends kept saying to me, "You're a writer, you can write it." And I said, I could write documentaries and stories about other people.
But it's your own personal.
Exactly. I could be a lawyer for other people, but to tell my own, it just felt too vulnerable. And so finally, a friend here in Santa Barbara, who's also a therapist, said, "You have got to get this story out." She said,
your own sake?
For my own sake. And she said, and for other people's sake, because so many people have experienced this kind of trauma in their life. So she sat with me, and at first I tried to write and talk at the same time, and it was too hard to do. So then she sat at the computer, and she just sat there, and I told and told.
Really?
I had lists of stories, and I told them, and she would ask questions, and half the time I would break down and cry. But I knew that because she was a therapist, I could just keep going. So that was how
Is she going to get some credit in the book?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think acknowledgements, just as an aside.
Absolutely, she will be in an acknowledgement.
Acknowledgements are very important.
Yeah, she's a therapist, and she just knew. She said, "You were just stuck with this story that needed to come out of you." And she said, "I had never sat with anybody and helped them write, but it was such a gift." That's how the first draft came out of me.
And what does this read? If that was the first draft, what is this?
This is probably the
16th?
Maybe the 5th or the 6th, okay. I think, at least. Yeah.
All right, now what I would be concerned about, I'm now talking as an editor, is what about your 7 brothers and sisters? Where do they stand in this whole situation?
That's a very good question. And each one of them agreed to sit for interviews with me. And originally. Well, while I was in the writing, I finally told them.
So they knew that you let them all know that you were
told them
writing.
I was writing the book, and they each agreed to have interviews, and some of them had 3 and 4 interviews with me for hours, and I tape recorded all of them, transcribed them, and they each got a copy of their stories. In fact, one of my sister's stories was like a microcosm of this whole book, but in 35 pages. It was everything I had lived. But she had lived it, and it was just in a shorter, version of. I have the details that I'm sharing, but each of them in their own way. But each of them has a different reaction to it.
So your mother, but it's primarily your mother who's influenced and
right, essentially
was responsible for
right. It
the
turns
effect
out
of all of
my mother was. She was an abuser, and she sexually molested me for years and years, from the time I was 4 years old till the time I was 16. And she was able to do that because my father closed his eyes and adored her.
But adored her.
Adored her so much,
ignored
right?
Whatever was going on.
Right. And she also groomed each one of us for a certain role.
Oh, really?
So she, again, I don't think any of this was conscious, but perpetrators tend to groom their victims. And my older brother, I was just speaking with him on the phone 2 days ago. He said he was the favored older son. So that was his role. He was, just very much favored. Then his twin sister was like the slave. My mother made her do all the caretaking for the kids, all the cleanup. And she, made her feel that she was fat. I mean, she had a way that she did with each one of us all the way through. And I was the one that she chose, at least originally, I was the first one that she chose to visit in the night in my bedroom. And, in these days we know a lot about sexual addiction, and we didn't in the 1950s. And so nobody ever suspected or questioned it at all. In fact, not only did they not question it, but when I would wake up in the mornings, my father would say, "You have the most wonderful mother on earth." Oh. So then I was just...
And you knew better.
I knew better, but you don't...
Can't say a word.
Don't say a word. Can't say a single word. And none of the brothers, none of us...
Yes, between each other, you never...
Not at all. Not at all.
Never shared any of that.
Right, because she wove this web we were this perfect family. In fact, one of the things...
And each one had to be...
Each one had to do the role. And when she would molest me, she would say, "I love you so much. And, you're so feminine. I love you so much." So I thought this was the way my mommy loves me. It's very creepy.
But I find it interesting that ultimately you realized that you had to let that story out. I mean, how many years you carried that without anybody knowing?
For years, because on the outside... It has to have
been a big load.
And I think that's the other reason I've done it, is not just for me to tell the story, but because so many people have lived with this kind of abuse or trauma and feel like they can't speak about it. And that if they could know someone else finally found her voice. It's only taken me 61 years. But finally, and that there's hope. And not only that, that I think partly why I found it is because of the love relationship with Hap as a husband.
Yeah, that's got to be part of the story.
A huge part of it.
Absolutely.
He has walked through the journey with me. And it was really when we had our first son, back to the circle in Hawaii, when we had Zach, I mean, I'm going to just sort of put some of the things that are in the book, but I had left for a few minutes because my mother came over to take care of him. He was only 2 weeks old. And she said, "Go take a swim." And when I came back from a 5-10 minute swim, it was just down the street on Oahu, she had her shirt off and she was breastfeeding my two-week-old baby.
No.
And I just flipped out, give me my baby. I grabbed my baby. But then I was so mixed up, Fred, because she started yelling at me, "What is wrong with you? When did you get so uptight?" And she picked up her clothes and then she went home, and then my father called to say, what did you do to your mother?
Yeah,
exactly.
I can see it.
So by the time Hap got home, I was a total emotional mess because I didn't even know what's right and what's wrong. And that's the story of this book, is you don't know what's right and what's wrong because it's the only world you live and know.
But what you're doing by exposing it, though, you're alerting other people. You're right, because other people, I think, have gone through, if not exactly,
it's not exactly the same thing, exactly,
but abuse of some sort.
Right.
But also, I want to go back to the 8 of you. I mean, that's your story.
Yes.
And you said you taped the other 7.
Right.
And have they read anything that you've written now? I mean,
yes. In fact, all of them but one have either read the whole book or are in the process of reading it right now. My oldest brother was the first one. The twin, right. He was the first one to ask to read it because he said he had blocked his entire childhood. He could not remember a thing from the age of 14 or earlier than the age of 14. And he said, "May I read your book?" And I said, how about if we start with the first 150 pages and just see where you are? And I was very protective of him. And do you have a therapist? Do you have support, about reading this? And this was a year ago, actually. And then he read the first 150 pages and called me and left me a message that I still have that said, this is opening up my whole life. He said, I always knew there was so much darkness that I was trying to flee from, but I could never name it because we were always told what a great, great family that we were. And that was one of my mother's themes as a children, is that no one will love you the way that I do.
So it's a perverted love.
It's a very perverted love. I found out it's not even love. It's terror, But that's what she said love was we have a one-of-a-kind family and no one will love you the way that I do. So that's the story that, and so this older brother he's been really the impetus for the others to read it, because after he read it,
if it changed his life, yes.
Yeah. And then he asked me, he wrote it, he said, may I write a letter to all of our siblings and tell them what this book has meant to me, and ask if they would all be willing to read it. And he sent me the letter, and the letter was, this has changed.
So that hopefully everybody is going to be on board.
Hopefully everybody,
So now we're getting, now we only have like 2.5 minutes left.
You're
so
kidding?
No, I know.
Whole half hour? That's amazing. That's right.
Anyhow, I want to know when it's going to be finished, where it's, and when are we going to present it to an agent? When are we going to get it to a publisher? When are we going to do publicity? When are we going to do all those other things?
I don't know the answers to those questions. I've had to
what is your timetable?
The timetable is that right now we are writing a new version of it, and it is a streamlined version of what this 515 page.
This is 515,
515.
double page, double.
Yeah, double space.
Yeah.
So we are streamlining it.
That's not a bad size.
I know.
Is it the size that's bothering you? Or
No. Actually, about 25 people have read it and said, "Don't touch it. Leave it all in."
Okay.
But we're feeling for the general public, there's two things that we want to do. We want to cut out extraneous parts of it that aren't really keyed into the theme, and then secondly, we want to add my adult perspective to it, because it doesn't walk the reader through. It just tells what happened.
You don't start it from you and then go back?
No, I started as the little girl.
Oh, you started
and
right from the beginning.
I really told it as that dual existence that you have when you live with trauma, where you're living terror at one point, but then you go about your everyday life. So that sort of split screen existence, I told the story as I lived it. And evidently those who have been through therapy and things, they get it all the way. They didn't need any explanation. But readers who haven't,
I think you've got to talk about those people. Yes.
Talk to those readers that don't understand,
who haven't had the experience, but still would be,
exactly
attracted to the book.
Yeah, and want to, because there's always some.
But you do have an agent.
I have an agent in New York
and you also have an editor. You were telling me earlier.
Both in New York, interested in asking.
She's not associated with a publisher. She's just
She's independent. She's an independent, and so they've both asked me to deliver them back. Actually, the agent has said she's waiting to see the version of it that is more streamlined and has my adult perspective on it.
Well,
commentary.
All I can say is thank you very much for being here. I mean, now I can't wait to read it. She just told. I don't care which version this is. I have to read it.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming in, and I just think that it sounds to me like it's a very, very important book.